This is the image Russia's military sensors cannot scrub from open-source satellite databases. A highway, not a trench, not a command post. A civilian highway running through occupied southern Ukraine, connecting Russia's mainland to the Crimean Peninsula. And it is a graveyard. 150 confirmed destroyed vehicles, each one verified by GPS coordinates, date stamp, satellite imaging, and by the warnings now circulating through Russian truck driver networks, telling each other that every kilometer of the R-280 Novorossiya highway is a kill zone. Not theoretically, not as a future risk, operationally, right now, today. And the fuel that was supposed to travel that highway to keep Russia's southern military garrison functioning has vanished entirely. The largest fuel distribution network in Crimea launched an emergency rationing program on May 31st, 20 liters per driver per station visit. By June 1st, TES canceled its own rationing system because the stations had run completely dry before a single coupon could be processed. Sevastopol's Russian-appointed governor stood before cameras and confirmed that AI-92 and AI-95 gasoline had reached zero at the city's stations. Not low, not critically constrained, zero. Make no mistake, what you are watching is not a Ukrainian ground offensive. Ukraine has not crossed the administrative border. There are no Ukrainian boots on that peninsula. What you are watching is a peninsula being methodically starved into strategic uselessness by autonomous systems operating 150 kilometers from the front line, and the mathematics of what has been accomplished in the last 30 days will tell you exactly how close Russia's entire southern military posture has come to total operational collapse. Let's get technical about this for a moment, because the data the mainstream press is ignoring is the most consequential in this entire war. Russia launched 73 cruise and ballistic missiles and 656 kamikaze drones at Ukrainian cities on the night of June 1st into June 2nd. Let that sit for a moment. 656 drones, 73 missiles. One of the most intense single-night aerial attacks of the entire conflict. And here is the detail that nobody in mainstream coverage is reporting with the weight it demands. That barrage was not the story. That barrage was Russia covering for what it cannot say in public. In the entire month of May 2026, across every active front, Russian ground forces advanced 14 square kilometers. 14. Not 14 miles. Not 14 city blocks, 14 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, purchased at the cost of 1,440 military personnel, recorded lost on June 1st alone, at the cost of 75 artillery systems and 1,583 drones destroyed in a single 24-hour window. Cumulative Russian losses as of June 2nd. 1,366,910 military personnel. That figure is not Ukrainian propaganda. It is compiled from documented engagements, satellite battle damage assessment, and open-source intercept analysis accumulated across 4 years of industrial-scale warfare. And in return for 1,366,910 casualties, Russia's net territorial change from December 2025 through May 2026 is negative 240.46 square kilometers. Russia captured 40.64 square kilometers in 6 months and simultaneously lost 281.1 square kilometers it had previously controlled. In the identical 6-month window 1 year earlier, Russia captured 515.84 square kilometers. The collapse from 515.84 to 40.64 is a 92% decline in 12 months. Not a slowdown, a 92% structural collapse in Russian offensive capacity. That is the number that 656 drones and 73 missiles launched against Ukrainian cities in a single night were built to obscure. And the mechanism producing that collapse is not adverse weather, eroded morale, or the accumulated weight of sanctions. It is a kill zone that Ukraine engineered with mathematical precision across 150 kilometers of Russian-held territory, and the R280 Novorossiya Highway runs directly through its center. Stay with me, because this goes all the way back to the fundamental logic of mechanized warfare, and it lands directly on the graveyard the R280 has become. Military doctrine has understood since the Second World War that an army is only as powerful as its supply chain. The Afrika Korps did not run out of will in North Africa in 1943. It ran out of fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts because Allied air and naval power had severed its Mediterranean logistical lifeline. The United States applied this same doctrine in Desert Storm, when coalition air forces spent the opening 2 weeks not attacking Iraqi armor in Kuwait, but methodically destroying the roads, bridges, fuel depots, and resupply convoys that would feed that armor in battle. The foundational lesson is written across a century of mechanized conflict. If you can starve an army before the battle, you do not need to fight the battle. Ukraine has absorbed that lesson and built the technological infrastructure to execute it at operational depth. The 412th Nemesis Brigade and affiliated units of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Force deployed 2 systems that have fundamentally altered the cost mathematics of this war. The Hornet drone and the Morrigan autonomous system, developed in direct collaboration with Ukrainian defense manufacturers and continuously refined through battlefield feedback, operate at ranges exceeding 150 kilometers behind enemy lines. Not the 40 to 50 kilometer radius of fiber optic FPV units requiring a ground operator in line-of-sight proximity. 150 kilometers of autonomous operational reach, penetrating the logistical tissue of Russia's rear areas without a pilot in range. These systems do not only conduct terminal strikes on moving vehicles, they conduct remote mining operations, releasing motion-activated explosive charges directly onto highway surfaces and converting the R280 into a road that destroys anything crossing it at any speed, in any weather, at any hour. Independent OSINT researchers have confirmed 150 destroyed vehicles on the R280 corridor and assess the actual total is likely double that figure. Zaporizhia's Russian-appointed governor Yevgeny Belitsky publicly claimed Ukraine was merely creating an illusion of a blockade, while simultaneously advising civilian drivers not to use the road. Russia's own Z-bloggers told him to test the illusion himself. Kherson Occupation Administrator Vladimir Saldo issued an emergency decree banning all civilian and commercial traffic from the R280 except military cargo, fuel, medicine, and perishables. Warnings circulating among Russian logistics drivers explicitly advise against sleeping inside parked vehicles along the route. Because any stationary object on the R280 is a confirmed target, and the systems watching it do not sleep. Here is the connection nobody in mainstream analysis is making, and it is the most operationally significant fact in this entire situation. The R280's interdiction has not merely disrupted fuel delivery to Russian armored units in southern Ukraine. It has severed fuel supply to the entire Crimean Peninsula. TES, the distribution network controlling approximately half of Crimea's civilian and commercial fuel market, began rationing on May 31st at 20 liters per driver per visit. By June 1st, TES canceled its own coupon program because every station had run completely dry before the coupons could be redeemed. Sevastopol's governor confirmed AI-92 and AI-95 at zero. Crimea's appointed head, Sergei Aksyonov, told the public not to panic and not to hoard. In December 2025, that same Aksyonov had publicly guaranteed a new logistics framework was in place and fuel availability on the peninsula was assured. That framework is now 150 charred hulks scattered along a road his own administration has banned civilian vehicles from using. Ukraine's June 2nd strike on the Ilsky refinery in Krasnodar, the 16th attack on that facility since the war began, and the 4th in 2026 alone, targeted a plant with an annual processing capacity of 6.6 million tons, one of the most critical energy assets in Russia's southern federal district. The fuel shortage has not remained confined to Crimea. Intelligence reporting confirms rationing systems are now activating in Russia's own Belgorod border region, demonstrating the cascade is moving upstream into Russian territory itself. Russia has responded to its internal crisis by banning aviation fuel exports until November 30th. Russia, a petrostate whose primary economic instrument is hydrocarbon exports, is running short of processed fuel for its own military operations. Ukraine is spending a fraction of a percent of Russia's expenditure to produce this outcome. A $4 million Iskander missile eliminated by a drone costing less than 1% of its value. An armored convoy worth tens of millions immobilized by motion-activated charges costing thousands. 656 drones and 73 missiles launched against Ukrainian cities in a single night, while Russia's entire southern supply architecture is being strangled by Ukrainian autonomous systems that cost a fraction of a single Russian cruise missile salvo. This is not a military campaign story. This is a financial collapse story wearing military clothing. And the financial collapse does not stop at the battlefield edge. On June 1st, Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Financial Times simultaneously published leaked internal Russian government communications, not from a Western intelligence agency, from Russia's own finance ministry and central bank. Finance Minister Anton Siluanov and senior central bank officials formally warned Vladimir Putin in writing that Russia's war spending trajectory has placed the economy on what their internal documents explicitly describe as an unaffordable path. Here is what that phrase translates to in actual numbers. Russia planned its entire 2026 federal budget around a total annual deficit of 3.79 trillion rubles. In the first 4 months of 2026 alone, that deficit reached 5.9 trillion rubles. The annual ceiling exceeded by more than 50% before May had concluded. Russia's National Wealth Fund, the sovereign reserve buffer built over 2 decades of oil revenue accumulation and specifically designed to absorb shocks of this magnitude, has been drawn down to less than 40% of its pre-war level. In the first 2 months of 2026 alone, 500 billion rubles were extracted from that reserve. Russia's GDP growth projection has been slashed from 1.3% to 0.4%, and that figure was built on the assumption that the war would end in the second half of 2026, allowing defense allocations to contract. The war has not ended. The gap created by that failed assumption represents an additional 1.2 to 1.5 trillion rubles of unplanned deficit materialized from a peace that never arrived. Meanwhile, the Defense Ministry is not discussing reductions. It is demanding an additional 3 trillion rubles, approximately $36 billion, in supplemental funding to meet its 2026 operational requirements. Russia raised its value-added tax from 20 to 22% and slashed the VAT liability threshold from 60 million to 10 million rubles annually, conscripting thousands of small businesses earning the equivalent of $2,500 monthly to finance a war they cannot vote against. Duma Deputy Renat Suleimanov stated publicly what the system was not supposed to allow. Tanks and shells have no consumption value. You cannot heat a home with an armored vehicle. The economy producing those weapons is being hollowed out to sustain them. Putin instructed the finance ministry to find cuts in civilian and social programs before touching defense allocations. Russia's own economists acknowledged for the first time in official documents that the country has entered a high-deficit, low-growth stagnation period projected to last 7 years. 7 years. That is the runway Russia's own planners are now working from. The cannon consumes everything. The population finances the cannon. Here is where the historical blueprint removes all ambiguity from this trajectory. Stay with me, because this parallel is exact, and its destination is documented in the historical record. In December 1979, the Soviet Union crossed into Afghanistan with the world's second-largest military and the confident internal assessment that the intervention would be measured in weeks. By February 1989, 9 years, 1 month, and 18 days later, the last Soviet armored column crossed the Termez Bridge back into the USSR. Not because the Mujahideen destroyed the Red Army. Soviet forces killed an estimated 1 million Afghans and lost approximately 15,000 of their own personnel across 9 years. By every tactical metric, the Red Army was never militarily defeated in the field. But the war had produced something that kill ratios and territory maps cannot measure. It generated a structural financial hemorrhage bleeding through the Soviet state budget year after year, with no visible terminal point. It created a demographic wound accumulating silently in Russian provincial towns, in zinc coffins arriving at train stations that no official statement could explain. It produced a credibility collapse inside the Communist Party elite and military officer corps that dismantled the internal consensus, keeping the system functional. The finance ministry warnings that spending was unsustainable, the elite dissent conducted in guarded whispers behind closed doors, the impossible arithmetic of sustaining an unwinnable campaign on a deteriorating economic foundation. Mikhail Gorbachev did not withdraw from Afghanistan because the Red Army was defeated. He withdrew because the structural system underneath the Red Army was fracturing beyond the point of repair. Russia's finance ministry has now formally told Putin in writing that the current path is unaffordable. Russia's budget deficit exceeded its annual target in 4 months. Russia's Crimean fuel stations have reached zero. Russia's southern supply highway is a documented kill zone with 150 confirmed destroyed vehicles. Russia's territorial advance capacity has collapsed 92% in 12 months. Russia has recorded 1,366,910 military personnel lost. The blueprint is not a prediction of what might occur. It is a real-time description of a system in the identical structural phase as the Soviet Union in 1987, exactly 2 years before the withdrawal that marked the beginning of the end. Watch what happens in the next 30 to 60 days, with the understanding that this road ends at a destination the historical record has already mapped. Every vehicle destroyed on the R-280 is an armored unit that cannot move when the operational order arrives. Every refinery strike is export revenue that never reaches the federal accounts. Every day the kill zone holds is another day the Crimean garrison moves closer to full operational paralysis. Vehicles stationary, armor immobilized, logistics dependent on ferry crossings across a strait already under threat. And in September 2026, Vladimir Putin faces the first full parliamentary Duma elections since the invasion began in February 2022. Those elections are not a democratic competition. They are the ritual through which the regime signals institutional stability, maintains elite consensus, and projects the legitimacy required for the system to continue operating. A regime entering those elections with empty Crimean fuel stations, a graveyard highway, a finance ministry formally warning of an unaffordable trajectory in writing, a 92% collapse in advance capacity, and 1,366,910 total military casualties on record is not projecting strength. It is projecting the arithmetic of a system consuming the reserves designed to sustain it. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell, because in the next 2 to 4 weeks, the indicators we are tracking across OSINT satellite imaging, Crimean fuel distribution reports, R-280 destruction counts, internal Russian economic releases, and Kremlin pre-election maneuvering will tell us whether Russia attempts a desperate logistics push to reopen the southern corridor, or begins the quiet operational drawdown that every financial and military number is already demanding. When that signal arrives, we will break it down in real time before anyone else. The graveyard on the R-280 is not a story about a road. It is a story about the structural floor beneath a military empire. And right now, that floor is cracking.